back to part 2. Enjoy your stay. Midway through the day, Ian whispered to me, "Count the people wearing backpacks. One of them is with us again." I casually looked over my shoulder and noticed that one of our group was walking without any gear. They trailed behind us, but were still in our vicinity. They moved slowly, but didn't show any of the jerky movements of the previous two. The thought that it was learning to mimic our movements unsettled me. Without really thinking, I shucked off my backpack and approached the imposter. Before they knew what was happening, I shoved them as hard as I could. The instant my hands pressed into their shirt, I felt something slick and warm give way like the outer layer falling off of a rotten mango. Their shirt slid off their body into my hands, and I quickly realized it was their skin. The thing was actually naked, but gave the appearance of clothes by altering the color of its almost translucent skin. I dropped the skin that had sloughed off, and it hit the ground with a wet slap. The creature toppled backwards and began yelping. I can only describe the sound like this. Imagine getting out of your bed in the middle of the night to go and take a piss. As you are feeling your way through the darkness to get out of the room, you step on your dog's tail. Imagine that surprised yelp of pain and the surprise that comes along with it. Now, focus on that emotion you felt when you heard that noise. The sudden surprise and guilt. In reality, the sound it made was nothing like a hurt dog. It just reminded me of that so much, of a wounded pet, that I can't differentiate the sounds. Here's the worst part. I shouldn't have felt bad. Those things were stalking and tormenting us. They were likely hunting us and felt bad for harming it. I shouldn't have felt bad about it, but it wanted me to, and so I did. The thing writhed on the ground on its back for a few seconds, making a pitiable noise. It reached back with its arms and pushed itself upright on its hands and on the balls of its feet. Its joints popped wetly, and its muscles and bones adjusted to fit this new position. It crab crawled away while shrieking the entire time as Ian pursued it with his walking stick, hoping to catch up to it and cave its head in. It wasn't until the thing disappeared from sight that I realized the shrieking wasn't just coming from the monster, but from U.S.A as well. It was trying to mimic her response. With Ian gone, and U.S.A.'s screams possibly drawing more of those things to us, I decided that I had to do something. I stepped forward and wrapped her up in my arms. She was shaking like a leaf in the wind. I stroked her hair and whispered that it was over. She managed to choke out something about its face. All I can make out was that something was terribly wrong with its face. She calmed down as I told her that everything was going to be all right. I didn't believe that myself, but it was the only thing I could think of that might bring her comfort. Ian returned fuming that the monster escaped, and I awkwardly broke off the hug. Ian didn't say anything. He just started walking. We continued following him, hoping that we would find the way, but knowing that he probably wouldn't. 6 hours later, we settled down for the night. It felt like we had been going in circles all damn day and made absolutely no progress. For all we knew, the thing could have been tinkering around with our memories and convincing us that familiar landmarks were new and leading us deeper into the wilderness. I didn't tell the others, but I think I knew what those things wanted with us. They wanted to lead us deeper and deeper into the woods. They were trying to force us to exhaustion, and when we were too weak to defend ourselves, they would descend upon us and eat us. Oliver was right about that. If that thing is similar to us in any way, then those twitching spasms were likely some sort of prion disorder that came from eating humans. After eating some jerky, since we decided against having a fire and drawing more of them to us, we reached the conclusion that we would have to sleep in shifts. I volunteered for the first watch because my insight into the monster's behavior had robbed me of any desire to sleep. The others went off without so much as another word. They were exhausted, and it wasn't until an hour into my watch that I realized that I was too. Even given the monster's grotesque appearance, everyone needs sleep. Jessica joined me about 2 hours into my watch. She admitted that she couldn't sleep after our encounter with the creature. I nodded in agreement. Both of us had seen some terrible, terrible things that others hadn't. We talked for a good 30 minutes about what we thought was going on, and how everyone was handling it. She was worried about Ian. She confessed that he was acting erratic, and that he was scaring her. I wrapped my arm around her for a moment and told her that we were all scared. She looked in my eyes and told me that she was glad I was here, and I felt something twist deep down inside me that I had buried a long time ago when I first met her. The longer she stayed with me on watch, the more personal our conversation became. She confessed that she and Ian had been fighting a lot recently, and that she was wondering if they were going to work it out at all. At the start of their relationship, they were great together. He made her feel wonderful, but there was something that didn't feel right, like there was something missing. I listened to her talk about everything that was going on in her life, and I knew I had to do something. I knew that if I didn't do it now, I would regret it. I had to tell her about the door. She listened quietly as I told her everything. It was the event that precipitated my breakdown at work and my social anxiety disorder diagnosis at the therapist's office. Everything started off simply enough one Friday at work. I was in the lunchroom eating my sandwich and reading a book as per my usual while my coworkers talked about their plans for the weekend. One of them was having a housewarming party, and they were inviting everybody at work. I figured that the invitation was only extended to the people he was talking to, until he asked me if I would be able to go and make it on Saturday. As it was the first time I had ever been invited to go hang out after work, I chose to go. I spent all of Saturday getting ready, planning what were interesting topics to bring up in case there was a full-on conversation, and the bottle of wine I was planning to give him as a housewarming gift. After psyching myself up, I left to go to the party with the bottle in hand and my spirits high. I convinced myself that I was going to be the life of the party, and that maybe if I played my cards just right, I could finally find a friend at work. That would make the time fly by instead of dragging on. It wasn't until I reached the house that the false bravado began to crumble apart. I stopped in front of the neighbor's house, as everywhere else already had a car parked there. It was then that I felt my heart beating like I had just ran a mile. I began heading up the driveway with the wine bottle slick in my hands from my palms sweating. It wasn't until I reached the front door that I realized that something was terribly wrong. All that excitement that had been building up since Friday afternoon was now replaced with something else. Apprehension. All those topics I had thought up seemed boring, and all the reassurances I'd given myself seemed hollow. I didn't feel prepared for this at all. At this point, a small part of me whispered something that has stuck with me to this very day. That voice intimated that they never really wanted me to come out. They had only given the invitation as a courtesy and didn't actually expect me to come to their house. It said that if I knocked on that door, that I would be making a fool out of myself. It told me that I wasn't even comfortable in my own skin. So how could I even dare to imagine that they would enjoy my company? They wanted to celebrate with their friends. They didn't want to listen to me fumble for something to talk about. All of those fears flashed in front of me, taunting me, demanding that I knock on the door and make myself look like an idiot. That part of me told me that I was better off alone, and I listened. I turned around, and without even knocking on the door, I left. No one had come in, and the music was playing loudly, so I doubt that they would have heard me anyway. I shouldn't have been there in the first place. Maybe I saw them watching me from the window. Maybe I didn't. Maybe they were laughing at me as I drove away, flustered and embarrassed. Maybe they went back to the party and joked about the social retard who had seemingly freaked out and ran away from their house while I went home and cried in the shower. Maybe. Jessica listened to her as I told the story. She smiled sadly as I started to cry into her shoulder. All of those feelings I had experienced outside of my coworker's house, came rushing back. All of that fear, the foolishness, and fatalistic failure smashed into me like a wave on the shore. She whispered soothing words into my ear and waited for me to collect myself. Once I did, she pulled away and told me that it was not my fault. It was there under the moonlight with her, face inches away from mine, that I did the worst thing I had ever done in my life. I kissed her. It was slow, hesitant, and romantic. I looked into her eyes and I saw her beautiful face. She pulled me towards her as she leaned back. Lost in the moment, I held her against me while telling her all the things I should have said when I first met her, and realized that I loved her. I held her like that for a few moments, afraid that if I let her go, I would lose this perfect moment. She was warm. She smelt like wildflowers. She smelt like happiness. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt comfortable. I felt content. I don't know when I drifted off, but I do remember waking up. In the love-drunk excitement of the previous night, I didn't think once about Ian or the consequences of my decision. I only thought about Jessica, and I forgot that she was his girlfriend. What I did last night was a beautiful mistake. I convinced her to cheat on him with me. I needed to tell him before the truth came out. I needed him to understand how I felt. I got up from the ground and stretched. Jessica was gone. I assumed she had gone back to her sleeping role in the middle of the night. I walked over to Ian, who was just waking up. He was rubbing the sleep out of his eyes, and asked me if I had stayed up all night. The words, they bled out of me, and once they started, I couldn't stop. I don't know what happened, man. We were just talking one moment, and then the next. Oh, Jesus, I didn't mean for it to happen. You know I love you, man. I wouldn't do anything to hurt you. It just happened, and now I can't take it back. Jessica's cry of surprise cut me off before I could go any further. Both me and Ian turned to the sound of her distress, and we knew instantly what had happened. The backpacks with our compass, food, and water had been stolen. It knew. Don't you see it? It knew that we could identify it without a backpack, and it couldn't shape its skin to take the appearance of one, so it stole them away from us. Now, the next time it wormed its way into our group, we wouldn't be any the wiser. Jessica and I never talked that night. Jessica had never left my brother's side that night. They had zipped their sleeping rolls together. She didn't open up to me about her worries, and I never actually kissed her. I poured my heart out to a thing wearing Jessica's skin while it was in my arms. I confessed my truest feelings to an erased entity masquerading as a person. I felt sick. The others woke up quickly after hearing her screaming. We quickly searched around the area, hoping to find some scrap of food or some indication of where our stuff had been taken to. We found nothing. It was long gone. We had no food, no water, and worst of all, no hope. We had no way of telling when one of those things was hijacking our heads and pretending to be a part of our group so it could distract us. With our compass gone, we had no means of following a set direction and hoping to pick the trail back up. In short, we were screwed with a capital S. Oliver demanded to know what I was doing last night. He wanted to know how I could be so careless as to fall asleep when I should have been watching over them and our gear. I lied and told him that someone had come around in the middle of the night to relieve me from my shift. I didn't mention that it was one of those things impersonating Jessica. I couldn't even bear to look either my brother or his girlfriend in the eyes at that moment. Oliver started to yell, but stopped when he saw I was on the verge of tears. I don't know if it was mercy or disgust that caused him to stop. It doesn't matter either way. We gathered up the only thing that they hadn't taken in the night, our sleeping rolls, and we continued walking. The hike without water or the prospect of food was simply unbearable. We were already exhausted, and the realization that we were soon going to be starving and dehydrated only served to sap more of our energy. Within a few hours, my mouth felt gummy and dry. While we were still under the canopy of leaves, the temperatures were still high in the 80s and low 90s. It didn't take long for dehydration to set in. I kept licking my lips in an attempt to keep them moist, but I could feel them beginning to crack as my saliva began to dry up. As we walked, Oliver picked up his pace and caught up with me. I looked over at him and knew without him saying anything that another one of those things had joined our group. He whispered to me, "Don't look directly at it. Just keep it in the corner of your eyes. I think that's how it messes with your mind. It would explain why you remember that guy that night, but the rest of us can't. You saw him, but the rest of us didn't. Don't get close. Just keep it in the corner of your eyes. It's been trailing us for about a half hour now. I think it just wants to watch and follow us. I pretended to be cracking my neck and looked at the tag-along in my peripheral. It trailed behind us by about a dozen feet. In its resting state, its facial features appeared staticky. I can make out eyes and a nose, but it was constantly shifting and rippling like a bubbling plastic piece. At this point, we were too tired to even bother with chasing it off. We just kept walking and hoped that it wouldn't try to join the group. It seemed content to keep its distance and keep us in its line of sight. It followed us for about 2 miles before it broke off towards the trees with a shambling, awkward gait. We were too tired to even try and set up a shift system. We just huddled together in an attempt to convince ourselves that we were safer when we were closer together. But every time one of us got comfortable enough to drift off, those things would start making noise. The noises started off as high-pitched yips whose sounds seemed to travel for miles. As the night drew on, they grew more aggressive. I remember one time as I was drifting off, hearing the grating rasp of my name. Evan. The things weren't just following us. No, they were learning. They were perfecting their mimicry. The thought disturbed me more than the idea of them out there watching us in the darkness. How long would it take them to become more human than human? What would they do to us once they were capable of walking amongst people again? I drifted off to sleep with the thought of beating around in my head like a man trapped inside of a wall. We got up on Tuesday morning and left without a word. At this point, there was nothing left to say. Some of us had been awake all night without any food or water. The constant stress had us totally worn down. We continued hiking in the same direction we had been going in, with the false hope that we would come across somebody. In the end, our hike looked more like a death march. My feet were covered in blisters that had ruptured and plastered the soles of my feet to my socks. Every step felt like I was tearing open the wounds a bit more. In an attempt to take my mind off the discomfort, I focused on my brother, who was walking in front of me. He wasn't as much walking as he was limping forward. He had stopped using his walking stick and was dragging it behind him like it was a broken limb. I watched as he stepped over a rock and the walking stick slipped out of his hands. He kept dragging himself forward as if nothing had happened. He didn't even register it falling out of his hands. It was at that point I knew that something was wrong. I knew that my brother wasn't my brother anymore. I quietly picked up his stick as I passed it. Amy went to call out to him and asked if he was all right, but I shushed her. I was so sure that one of those things had replaced him and was now leading us deeper into the woods. I realized that I would only have one chance at this. The instant it knew that we knew, it would try and run away. All it would take was one good swing to the back of its head, and we would be able to take one of those things. The stick had a bit of weight to it, about 5 or 6 pounds, enough to crack open a skull if it was swung hard enough. I began walking faster while trying to avoid the underbrush that might give away my approach. The thing wearing my brother's skin continued limping forward as I drew closer. I waited until I was within swinging distance before raising the stick above my head. My heart was beating in my chest, and my palms were so sweaty that it felt like the stick would slide right out of my hands. It kept on moving forwards, completely unaware of what I was about to do to it. I whispered, "I'm sorry," just before I swung the walking stick down with all of my strength. Ian turned to face me as he mumbled groggily, "Sorry for what?" My muscles locked, and I stopped mid-swing, and the stick stopped just inches away from his face. He blinked in surprise before muttering, "Evan, what's wrong?" His voice sounded distant and empty, like he was in between a waking and sleep state. It was then that I knew the extent of his condition. He was pale and looked like the slightest breeze would blow him over. He wasn't one of those things. He was delirious from dehydration, sleep deprivation, and starvation. The walking stick fell out of my hands and bounced on the ground next to us. I dragged my tongue across my lips, and it felt like I was licking sandpaper. I began to whimper,
"Jesus, Ian, I thought you were one of those things. Oh God, I'm so sorry."
He didn't even react to my apology. He just turned around, continued walking in the direction we were going in. Amy just watched everything unfold numbly before she started following him. Oliver shook his head sadly, but he didn't look any better shape. His eyes were glazed and his lips were cracked and red from rubbing them. I watched my brother shambling forward, and it reminded me of one of those old voodoo movies where someone is put into a trance and forced to work until they die from exhaustion. His mouth hung open, and he moved like he was being dragged along on puppet strings. I picked up the walking stick and began to follow him. I wondered how much longer he had left in him, and what any of us could do if he just fell over and stopped walking. I wondered how much longer any of us had. I don't know how long we walked for. Everything melted together in a muddled mess of time. I remember losing my footing and tripping quite a few times, but I barely felt it. The third time, I didn't even realize I was lying on the ground until Jessica stepped on me as she was passing by. There was no apology. She was too far gone to even recognize what she had even stepped on. I dragged myself to my feet and felt lightheaded, but continued putting one foot in front of the other. The fifth time I fell, I wondered if it would have been better to just lie down and wait to die. An excited yawp behind me from one of those things drove me to my feet. It wasn't until we bumped into the sign for Little Bear Canyon that I realized how close we were to salvation. The post for Little Bear Canyon also had a branching sign that pointed in the direction for the TJ Corral, which was only a few miles away from where we started at the Gila Cliff Dwellings, if we walked along Route 15. Ian was heading in the right direction, and we were almost home free. In my excitement, I began calling to the others to let them know that the end was near. I looked around me and shouted, "Jessica, Ian, Oliver and Heather, Amy, I know where we need to..." The words died on my lips as I counted the names and realized it wasn't over yet. The others kept moving as if they hadn't even heard me talking. The imposter shuffled alongside us, and for once, it was easy to identify them. I don't know whether or not they had let down their guard after seeing our conditions, but this one was obvious. She moved slowly, but her movements didn't convey her exhaustion. Everyone else was sweating and looking like the walking dead, but she was fine. I waited for her to get close enough to follow the trail the others were going down before I raised Ian's walking stick and growled, "Turn around right fucking now. I can see you." She turned around slowly, and I felt my heart skip a beat. She looked almost exactly like U.S.A, except for a brown tinge to her hair. She could have been her twin. I knew what it was planning before it even opened its mouth and asked, "What are you doing, Evan?" "Don't call me that," I winced. "What are you rambling about? Please move out of the way. We're almost safe from those things." "I know what you are." Heather turned white at the realization. She began speaking quickly. "I'm not one of those things. Please, Evan, you have to remember. There were 6 of us. Those things want us to think there were only 5 so they can take one of us with the others. Those things don't want us. They only want the weakest one. Please, let's go before they catch—" "Shut up," I snapped. I raised the walking stick in my hand and brandished it at her. "Think about it, Evan. Do I move like one of those things? Do I speak like them? That should be enough to prove I'm human." "No. Ian's my brother. U.S.A, his girlfriend." "I'm your girlfriend. I sat on your lap on the car ride. Please don't kill me, Evan. I love you. Don't you remember? I love you." I lowered the stick that was in my hand as memories bombarded me. I had met her one night when my brother forced me to go to a club with him. Heather had been sitting at the bar all night drinking. It wasn't until she tried to stand up and fell into my arms that we actually talked. I remembered lazy Sundays in bed, watching cheesy B sci-fi movies. I remembered holding her close to me after making love and hearing her whisper sweet nothings to me. I remembered our life together. I rasped, "Heather, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." She cooed, "Evan, it's not your fault." She went to touch me, and I sprang back like I had been bitten by a snake. The instant I heard those words, I knocked. The stick caught her unaware in the side of her face, and I felt her jaw give way to the sudden force of my attack. She burbled through broken teeth. The second strike dented her temple as the temporal bone shattered. She kept trying to talk, but it was too late, and too much damage had been done. That door was shut to me now. I kept swinging the walking stick down on her head until it splintered and snapped. I looked up from her twitching body and saw my brother watching me in horror. "Heather, oh my God!" I spoke through gritted teeth and regarded him with red-rimmed eyes. "Come on, we have to go." He went to keep talking, but I walked past him. I didn't want to explain it to him. He eventually ran ahead. Invigorated with the prospect of finding rescue on the road, I looked behind me one last time. The last thing I saw was one of those things dragging away Heather's corpse. It looked emaciated and half mad with starvation. At that very moment, I wasn't afraid of the thing. I just felt pity. Whether or not it forced that emotion on me, I'll never know. I turned away and caught up with the others on Route 15. We were on the road for 15 minutes before we managed to flag down a car and an ambulance was called for us. The doctor said that our exposure to the elements, combined with our starvation and dehydration, triggered the auditory and visual hallucinations we experienced. It's the typical response you'd be given after hearing our half-dead ramblings about creatures warping their flesh and our memories to drive us to the brink of death, so they could prey on us when we were at our weakest. We spent a week there while receiving treatments, recounting our horrific experiences, and then subsequent psyche evaluations before we were released. I tried to talk to the others about it. Ian and U.S.A refused to talk with me about it. I don't really know Oliver or Amy, so that's off the table too. They just want to forget. I can't forget. Here's the thing. I still remember Nadia asking me to help her find her lighter. I recall staying up late and talking with her by the campfire while she smoked like a chimney. I can recite Gary's terrible puns that he'd make about almost everything, and Lucas's determination at hiking this trail while slowly succumbing to the effects of his multiple sclerosis. I can recall whispering sweet nothings to U.S.A under the glow of the full moon. I can still envision that moment clear as day, even months down the road later. I know the conversation we had, verbatim. I can remember the feeling of her skin against mine, and the smell of her hair as I pressed myself against it when I reached that one true moment of connectivity. I remember Heather pleading and begging me not to kill her. Despite writing this all months later, I can see all of those things clearly. Sometimes, late at night, I can even remember driving up to the Gila National Park with Heather sitting in my lap, playfully grinding against me and telling me how fun our hike was going to be. Sometimes I think about that memory more than I should. Since I can't talk to my brother or U.S.A about this, I had to find some other outlet. I guess I'm writing all this for that one reason. Catharsis. In the end, I keep wondering if what I did was right. Did I make the right choice? I want you to read this and tell me that I had no other option, that the risk of one of them escaping into the city forced my hand. I know that's not the case. I could have walked away or tried to scare her off, but I didn't. What kind of person can look into someone's eyes, remember all of the things they did and the life that they had, and do what I did? Who can have all of those memories and end everything so callously? It doesn't matter if none of it was real, because in that moment, it was to me. Who can look at someone and feel such love for them before you kill them? The answer to that question is simple now that I ask myself out loud. I just don't like the answer. Hey everyone, what lurks beneath here? I hope you enjoyed the conclusion to this video and to this story. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and leave a comment, like this video, and subscribe if you're new. I'll have tons more exciting content coming in the future with more of cool videos just like these. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Take care.